We were designed, engineered, manipulated. In an age lost to time, celestial beings known as the Anunnaki descended from the stars, not to enlighten us, but to control us. And in their secret laboratories, using forbidden knowledge and alien technology, they altered the genetic code of Earth's early hominids, creating us a new species. This is the full timeline, exposed, of the genetic experiments that made modern humanity. From failed prototypes to divine hybrids, from Adamu to Zeusudra, from slaves to kings. The truth has been buried in clay tablets, hidden by scholars and dismissed as myth. Until now. There was a time when humans did not walk the earth. Only beasts roamed the wild lands, and the Anunnaki, those who had descended from the stars, labored under the weight of their mission. They came from Nibiru, a world in crisis, in search of one thing: gold, the element that could repair their failing atmosphere. The gold was found, but in the depths of the Abzu, the mining was harsh. Even gods began to rebel. Faced with collapse, the Anunnaki leadership turned to a radical solution, not spiritual, but scientific. In a sacred facility known as the House of Life, a place hidden from both man and beast, the gods would attempt something unprecedented: the creation of a new being. At the center stood Enki, the architect of life. With him, Ninhursag, the life-giver and expert in healing. Ningishzida, the genetic scribe, guardian of the codes. And Damkina, also known as Ninki, consort of Enki, royal mother of Marduk, and bearer of divine blood. Together, they initiated a forbidden act. They chose a wild hominid, Homo erectus, and fused it with the genetic essence of the Anunnaki. But success did not come easily. They created many hybrids. Most failed. Some were disfigured, others were mindless. Some survived briefly, others died in hours. The process was brutal, written in failure, and recorded by Ningishzida with divine precision. "These are not yet fit to serve," Ninhursag said. "We have made flesh, but not function." Eventually, one survived. The Lulu, a hybrid servant. He could understand, he could obey, he could work. But he was sterile. The gods had made a tool, not a people. Enki pushed forward. A second phase began, this time to create a reproductive being, a new species that could sustain itself. Adamu was formed first, and this time Ninhursag herself carried the embryo to term in her divine womb. He was not a prototype, he was a model. Then came Tiamat, the female, carried and birthed by Damkina, Ninki, the mother of royal lines. Now there were two, male and female, capable of reproduction. They were placed in Eden, the Anunnaki-controlled zone in Mesopotamia. Not as rulers, not as free beings, but as assets. They were taught to obey, to labor, to respect the gods as creators, not as companions. From Adamu and Tiamat would come the first generation of true humans. This was not the dawn of civilization. This was the codified control of an engineered species. This was us. As Adamu and Tiamat multiplied, the first generations of humans spread through the regions around Eden. They worked, they learned, and they obeyed. The gods had succeeded, partially. The mission had been stabilized. The minds were productive. The rebellion had been silenced. Humanity, in its controlled form, was functioning. But Enki saw further than the rest. He had engineered the Lulu and refined the model into Adamu. He had overseen the implantation, the birthing, the placement into Eden. He had given humanity not only breath, but code. Still, it wasn't enough. "They serve, but do not innovate," Enki observed. "They multiply, but do not evolve." There was something missing, something that could not be inserted through gene splicing or programmed in a lab. Something deeper, more primal, more natural. That's when he turned his gaze away from the cities of the gods and toward the wild zones. Beyond the cultivated boundaries of Eden, far from the structured control of Anunnaki domains, wild humans wandered. They were descendants of earlier prototypes, survivors of abandoned models, hybrids left to live and mutate on their own. They were untamed, but their bodies were evolving. Their instincts were sharper. Their connection to the earth was real. And this intrigued Enki. No committee was called, no council consulted. This would be his decision alone. He descended into the wilderness, not with laboratory tools, but with purpose. He approached 2 earthborn women. They had no names in the records, no rank, no divine authorization. They were not experimented on, they were chosen. Enki did not engineer these unions, he mated. Not to create workers, not to produce a priest or a king, but to test natural compatibility, to see what would emerge from unfiltered union. The offspring of these unions were never named in the chronicles. No dynasties trace back to them directly. But that wasn't the point. The point was that the gods had crossed a line, no longer engineers behind glass. Now, participants in their own experiment. This was the first time the Anunnaki had blended with humanity by choice, without ritual, without intention of control. And though the council might have condemned it, none could undo it. The gods had stepped into the world of their own creations, and humanity would never be the same. What Enki began that day would ripple through every generation to come. This was no longer just a project. It was becoming a legacy. The wild unions had proven one thing: humanity was capable of more. Those early offspring may not have founded royal lines, but their instincts, their adaptability, their raw intelligence, it revealed what Enki had suspected all along. The human model could be pushed further. The Lulu had served. Adamu and Tiamat had reproduced. Their descendants had spread and survived, but they lacked something critical: awareness. They could dig, obey, and even speak, but they could not record, they could not lead, they could not maintain the systems of divine law or preserve sacred knowledge. The gods needed a human, not of muscle, but of mind. A being who could comprehend celestial order, track the stars, perform rituals, manage temples, pass down law, oversee offerings, and interact with gods, not as a slave, but as a servant of structure. The first priest, the first scribe, the first human worthy of divine instruction. This time, Enki would not look to the wild. He would not engineer recklessly. He would select with purpose. Among the descendants of Adamu and Tiamat, a human woman had risen, her lineage refined by generations of careful observation. She possessed awareness, intuition, and spiritual depth. Enki chose her, not as a vessel, but as a partner in legacy. With her, he fathered a new creation, Adapa. Adapa was not like the others. He was semi-divine, intelligent, obedient, but not submissive. He had structure, language, curiosity. He was the first human who could represent the gods before mankind, and mankind before the gods. To complement him, Titi was created, a genetically perfected consort, formed to match Adapa not only in biology, but in spirit and intellect. Ninhursag oversaw her creation. Damkina, Ninki, may have also played a guiding role, ensuring this next phase of humanity was not just functional, but royal. They were not left to roam. They were raised in the temples, under the watch of Enki and the wisdom of the Anunnaki elite. Adapa and Titi were taught the laws of the heavens, the order of the gods, the sacred rituals, the patterns of the constellations. They were prepared, not for labor, but for leadership. And when the time came, they were united, a sacred pair, meant to birth a new legacy. From them came Cain and Abiel, 2 sons, 2 paths, and with them, the experiment reached a new level. This was no longer about survival or labor. It was about control through civilization, about legacy through lineage, about order through blood. The gods were no longer engineers, they were kingmakers. Both sons were raised under divine instruction. Cain, the firstborn, worked the soil. Abel, the second, tended the flocks. Each was brought before the gods to present offerings, symbols of their labor and loyalty. Cain's gift came from the ground, Abel's from the life of the herd, and the gods made their preferences known. Enlil favored Abel. Marduk, loyal to his father Enki, supported Cain. Divine division became human conflict. Jealousy turned to rage. Rage turned to blood. Cain struck down his brother. The first human life ended not by nature, but by ambition in the shadow of the gods. This was more than fratricide. It was a crack in the experiment, and yet Cain was not destroyed. Let him live, Enki decreed, but mark him. Let his face carry the memory of what he has done. Cain was exiled east of Eden, his essence altered. He would carry the burden of violence, but also the instinct of survival. And so the gods turned once more to Adapa and Titi. The experiment continued. They birthed a third son, Sati. Unlike Cain, Sati was composed, measured, a return to divine design. He became the new vessel of legacy. Sati joined with Azura, a woman of equally sacred lineage, their son, Enki. To preserve the purity of the divine thread, Enki joined with his sister Noam, not out of taboo but as a strategy of preservation. The Anunnaki knew, bloodlines diluted are bloodlines lost. From Enki and Noam came Cunan, and the sacred line continued. Cunan and his half-sister gave birth to Malalu and Dunna, who joined to produce Irid. Irid, many generations removed from Adapa but still carrying the Anunnaki imprint, took as his partner Baraka. From them came a name that would echo through time, Enki, known in later ages as Enoch, the man who walked with the gods. He was not a servant, he was not a priest, he was a conduit, a recorder, a celestial witness. Enki united with Adini, and their son was Methuselah. Methuselah joined with Enoch, and from them came Lamech, later known as Lamech. By now, the bloodline had surpassed the boundaries of humanity. It was royal, constructed, preserved, directed. Each union was deliberate, each child, a vessel of continuity. This was not the product of random procreation. This was genetic succession, orchestrated by gods who were no longer creating laborers, but preparing a ruler. And from this divine human lineage, stretching from Adapa through Enoch and Methuselah, would soon come the one chosen not to rule, but to survive what the gods had planned next. The line of Adapa had been secured. From Cain to Lamech, through Enoch and Methuselah, the genetic legacy had been carefully preserved, each generation carrying more than blood. They carried a plan, a code, a divine intention. By the time Lamech walked the earth, the sacred lineage had matured. It no longer resembled the wild humans of the early experiments. This line was royal, infused with the genetic essence of Enki, the memory of the heavens, and the burden of legacy. But while Enki observed in silence, his firstborn son was preparing to make his own move. Marduk, heir to Nibiru, guardian of the gods' future, was no longer content to sit in the shadows of Earth's experiment. He had watched the genetic tree grow. He had seen the bloodline develop into something the gods themselves had once ruled alone. And now he wanted his claim, not through violence, not through war, but through marriage. In the cities of men, among the elite lines of earthborn hybrids, there lived a woman whose lineage traced back to Adapa himself, Sarpanit. She was not an ordinary earthling. She was noble, educated, connected, and her genetic markers bore the refined imprint of the Anunnaki design. Marduk chose her, not in secret, but in full view of the Anunnaki Council. This was no experiment, this was a declaration. He would unite the house of heaven with the house of earth, not in myth, not in mythos, but in dynasty. The gods were stunned. The council divided. Enlil saw through it immediately. He seeks kingship through the womb of man, Enlil warned. This is not love, this is a strategy. For Enlil, this was the ultimate betrayal, not of custom, but of command. The Anunnaki had drawn lines, gods above, humans below. Mating was to be controlled, sacred, experimental. But Marduk wanted more. And so, the marriage of Marduk and Sarpanit was sanctioned, not by all, but by enough. The ceremony was held, the union consecrated, and from it came 2 sons. Asar, remembered in Egypt as Osiris, noble, wise, and beloved. And Satu, later called Seth, the ambitious, the jealous, the challenger. These were not just children, they were founders of thrones. Through this union, Marduk laid claim to earth, not only in blood, but in legacy. His sons would not just live among men, they would rule them. Their names would be written in temples, carved in stone, spoken in rites for thousands of years. This was the most dangerous alliance the gods had ever seen, and it would not go unanswered. The marriage of Marduk and Sarpanit wasn't just a union of blood. It was a line in the sand. What began as a calculated political move sent shockwaves across the divine ranks. The moment Marduk, a royal Anunnaki, married an earthling woman, not in secret but in full ceremony, it shattered centuries of protocol. And the gods were not the only ones watching. Above Earth, stationed on orbital outposts and planetary stations, the Igigi had long observed in silence. These were the Anunnaki astronauts, the Watchers. They had labored, obeyed, and remained outside the web of Earth's evolving power games. But now, they saw something that changed everything. Marduk had claimed the Earth through blood. He had legitimized interbreeding. He had opened the gates. If he could do it, so could they, and they would. Under the leadership of Shamgaz, the discontented Igigi made their move. During the celebration of Marduk and Sarpanit's wedding, the Watchers descended, not in pairs, not in secret, but in mass. What began as silent rebellion exploded into open defiance. They didn't ask permission. They didn't request unions. They took earth-born women. The council had not sanctioned it. Enlil had not approved it. There were no genetic screenings, no oversight. The unions were raw, primal, and deliberate violations of the established order. And from those unions came the Nephilim. They were not gods. They were not men. They were hybrids born of rebellion. They were giants, warriors, tyrants. Born of lust and anger, they wielded power untamed by ritual or tradition. They disrupted the world. They shattered cities, desecrated temples, and tore apart the fragile structure the Anunnaki had spent ages refining. Enlil was enraged. Enki was cautious, knowing Marduk's precedent had paved the way. Marduk remained silent, trapped in the shadow of his own rebellion. The Earth was no longer a controlled colony. It had become a battlefield of bloodlines. The descent of the Watchers was not just an uprising, it was contamination, a spiritual insurrection that mirrored what later generations would call the fall of the angels. Divine beings who descended, took mortal women, and bore children that should never have existed. The gods knew this could not be undone, and it would not end with scandal. The Earth was no longer what it had been. The Nephilim, born of fallen Watchers and mortal women, roamed freely, overpowering cities and defying divine law. The balance between gods and men had crumbled. The sacred bloodlines were tainted by rebellion, lust, and uncontrolled breeding. What the Anunnaki had built over millennia was now at risk of collapse. The council was in chaos. Enlil, guardian of order, demanded a reckoning. His solution: wipe the slate clean. Marduk, implicated by precedent and driven by ambition, stood his ground. He had too much to lose. Enki, meanwhile, said nothing, but silence did not mean surrender. Where others shouted in council, Enki moved in secret. He understood that the divine legacy could not survive a full reset unless it was preserved through strategy, not through declarations, but through a vessel. That vessel would be a child, untainted, genetically chosen, and prepared not to rule, but to endure. In the city of Shurubak, capital of civilization and one of the last bastions of divine order, lived Batanash. She was no ordinary woman. She was descended from Adapa's line, noble in spirit and form, married to Lamech, a man of respected lineage tracing back to Methuselah. But Enki saw in her something even greater: potential. This was not lust. This was a genetic correction. The divine human legacy had been destabilized by interbreeding with wild women and unauthorized unions. But Batanash carried the pure bloodline. She represented the last stable link in the chain that had begun with Adapa. Enki made his choice. He approached her in secret, without the council's knowledge, and mated with her, deliberately, not for desire, but for design. Batanash conceived. To avoid suspicion and prevent political backlash, the child was declared to be the son of Lamech. It was a calculated move, a cover. The child's name was Ziusudra, but his identity was far more than a name. Ninmah, the womb goddess and guardian of the life sciences, joined Enki in guiding the boy's development. Ziusudra was not raised to lead nations or build cities. He was taught the sacred sciences, the rituals of preservation, and the cosmic laws passed down from Nibiru. He was being prepared, not as a prince, not as a priest, but as a preserver of mankind. Enki never spoke of it in council. He made no proclamation. He simply watched the boy grow, knowing what was coming, because soon the gods would decide to destroy what they had built. And when they did, Ziusudra would be the last hope. Ziusudra had grown under the quiet gaze of his true father. Enki had prepared him not for glory, but for survival. He had watched the world unravel, bloodlines corrupted, divine protocols broken, humans spiraling beyond the control of their creators. The signs were clear. The Nephilim ruled like tyrants, towering giants bred from defiance. The Watchers, led by Shamgaz, had spread their seed without order or permission. The balance between heaven and earth had collapsed. The divine experiment was no longer sacred, it was contaminated, and Enlil, whose role had always been order and enforcement, would no longer tolerate it. "Let it end," he decreed. "Let the waters rise and wipe the slate clean." This wasn't a divine tantrum. It was a calculated extinction. A celestial alignment was approaching, an unavoidable event of astronomical destruction. Enlil would allow it to proceed, not with guidance, not with mercy, no warning, no intervention. The Anunnaki Council obeyed, but Enki did not comply. He had taken an oath not to interfere, but he found a loophole. He would not shout warnings from the mountaintops. He would not address the public, but he would speak to his son. To the world, Ziusudra was the son of Lamech, but to Enki, he was the hidden seed, the last chance to preserve the sacred bloodline. In the night, Ziusudra received a dream. The voice came through reeds, encoded in symbol and sound, a whisper through the fabric of reality itself. "The great wave is coming. The earth will convulse. The sky will burn. Build an ark. Seal it tight. Gather the seed of all living things, animal, plant, and human. Preserve what must not be lost." Ziusudra obeyed, quietly, precisely. And then it came. The deluge. Tidal waves swallowed cities, mountains collapsed, fire rained from the skies. The Nephilim perished, the Watchers vanished, temples were torn apart, entire civilizations erased. It was not a myth, it was the first reset. But from the rising waters, one vessel remained. Ziusudra had survived, with his family, sacred animals, and select human custodians of knowledge. When the waters finally receded and the earth stood still once more, the Anunnaki descended, and they were horrified, not by the destruction, but by the silence that followed. Even Enlil, who had sanctioned the purge, was shaken. He had expected rebellion to be erased, but instead he saw that humanity's spirit had not been destroyed. It had endured. The council gathered, no longer to argue, but to decide. Never again shall we destroy mankind, they declared. A new covenant was born. From that moment forward, mankind would not be eradicated, but guided. The gods would step back, but not away. They would no longer rule with open dominion, but through temples, kings, and codes. Civilization would begin again. Kingship would be handed down from heaven, not seized by men. And humanity would walk forward, never free, but never forgotten. The chains were not removed. They were simply made invisible. The waters had receded. Where once cities stood, only silence remained. The temples were gone. The Nephilim extinguished. The hybrid chaos washed away. But aboard the vessel, life remained. Ziusudra emerged not as a survivor, but as the preserver. He carried the seed of divine blood, the rituals of the gods, and the genetic memory of a world that had been wiped clean. And the gods knew he was not just a man. He was the thread from which civilization would be rewoven. The Anunnaki descended to survey the aftermath. They saw the silence, the stillness, the cost of what they had permitted. And in that moment of reckoning, even Enlil relented. From the ashes of the flood, a new order was declared. Never again shall we destroy mankind. But the gods did not step aside. They restructured. From the sacred mountaintop and the hidden cities of the gods, they re-established what they called kingship, not as a right of man, but as a gift from heaven. Ziusudra was taken to the land of the crossing, a divine domain untouched by the floodwaters. There, he was granted knowledge, longevity, and purpose. He would not rule, but his blood would. Through his descendants, kingship was reinstated upon the earth, not by merit, not by conquest, but by divine decree. Cities rose again, Kish, Uruk, Eridu, each founded under the authority of kings whose veins carried the essence of the gods. These kings were not merely rulers, they were intermediaries. Temples were rebuilt, not as places of worship alone, but as centers of control. Calendars, rituals, offerings, and law all re-established under divine instruction. The gods no longer needed to walk openly among men. They now ruled through symbol, through tradition, through legacy. Their names would live on: Enlil, Enki, Inanna, Marduk, engraved into stone, etched into ceremony, embedded into the very structure of society. The bloodline had survived. The kingship had been restored. The gods remained. But now, they ruled from behind veils. Civilization had begun again, but freedom was still an illusion. The age of open dominion had ended. The age of invisible control had begun. But what of us? What had truly been created? From the mines of the Abzu to the cities of Mesopotamia, humanity had been sculpted, not by evolution, not by divine chance, but by engineering. We were designed, not born of the wild, not shaped by nature alone. From the very beginning, we were a hybrid species. The Anunnaki took the essence of Homo erectus, primitive, earthborn, and mixed it with their own genetic code, not once, not quickly, but through a long process of trial, error, and refinement. They gave us language, reason, structure. They gave us obedience and instinct to serve, to follow, to build. The fingerprints of their design are not lost. They are written in us, in our bloodlines, in our myths, in our sacred texts and buried tablets. We are the product of hybrid evolution, a deliberate fusion of heaven and earth. A biological project born in secrecy, hidden behind centuries of theology, buried beneath temples and mistranslated records. The Sumerian tablets say it plainly. They tell of gods who created mankind, who ruled and interbred with them, who imposed kingship and watched as empires rose and fell in their name. Ziggurats were not built for religion. They were built for contact. Kings did not claim power. It was lowered from heaven. And yet, not all of the story has been told. Museums hide tablets. Governments suppress translations. Institutions erase what doesn't fit. Why? Because if the full truth were known, that we are the product of genetic manipulation by a race of interstellar beings, it would shatter everything, our religions, our histories, our sense of self. Were we created to serve, to mine, to worship? Or were we given something unexpected? A spark, a mutation, a potential to evolve beyond even what they intended? Maybe the Anunnaki didn't just build workers. Maybe they accidentally created gods in waiting. That answer may still lie hidden. Beneath the sands of Mesopotamia, inside the untranslated tablets, in the records they don't want us to see. But this much is certain: we are not natural. We are not random. We are the legacy of gods. Some say the Anunnaki returned to the stars, their mission complete, their temples left as echoes in stone. Others believe they never left at all, that they walk among us, disguised in bloodlines, hidden in institutions, operating behind the scenes of governments, religions, and corporations. And then, there are those who await their return, who study the stars, who decode the tablets, who watch for the signs, waiting for the old gods to rise again. Are they gone? Are they still here? Or are they watching, waiting, preparing? Whatever the answer, their story is not over, and neither is ours. For me, this is not mythology. This is forbidden history. Do you believe humanity was engineered by the gods? What secrets still lie beneath the sands of ancient Mesopotamia? Could the Anunnaki return? Leave your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next video.